Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into probably one of the most complex and, well, frankly, tragic decades in American history, the immediate aftermath of the Civil War.
Yeah, it was supposed to be this moment of reconciliation.
Yeah,
You know, Lincoln's famous words, malice toward none.
a beautiful sentiment,
Yeah.
but it really slammed right into the staggering challenges of actually making peace work.
Absolutely. And that's our mission today, really. We're digging into the essential story from the chapter covering what's often called the Ordeal of Reconstruction, roughly 1865 to 1877.
It's a story of massive political change, but also um, pretty devastating social failure in many ways.
That's right. And right at the start, this chapter lays out these four huge looming questions that basically defined the whole era.
Okay, what were they?
Well, first, how is the South, which was physically wrecked, going to be rebuilt? Second, what about the 4 million newly freed slaves? How would they actually fare as citizens?
Huge questions. What else?
Third, how exactly do you bring the defeated Confederate states back into the Union? Like, what's the process?
And the last one.
Yeah.
This feels like the kicker.
It really was. Who directs this whole thing? Is it the president's job or does Congress get to decide? And that question, it fueled so much of the political chaos that followed.
Right. So before we even get to the plans, let's paint a picture of the South in 1865.
Yeah.
Because the devastation, it's hard to overstate, isn't it?
It really is. The source calls it a collapsed civilization. Think cities like Charleston, Richmond, just rubble. Factories silent, smokestacks cold.
And the infrastructure.
Destroyed. The chapter mentions rails literally corkscrewed by Sherman's troops. Totally unusable. Agriculture was crippled too. I mean, the whole slave labor system. Gone.
And that economic hit.
Yeah.
The book puts a number on it.
Yeah, it's something like $2 billion lost just in the investment in slaves.
Yeah.
The planter class was just humbled. Economically wiped out, many of them.
But crucially, and this seems really important for what comes next, the source says many white Southerners were beaten but unbent, still defiant.
Exactly. Calling the federal government your government. That tells you a lot. The starting point wasn't exactly cooperation. It was deep hostility, a really dangerous situation.
And that hostility crashes right into freed people trying to figure out what freedom actually means.
Right. Emancipation wasn't neat. The chapter calls it halting and uneven. People had to actively claim their freedom bit by bit.
And how did they do that? What were the first steps?
Well, it often started with basics, asserting dignity, taking new names sometimes, or demanding to be called Mr. or Mrs. instead of by their first name.
Small things, but symbolically huge.
Absolutely huge. Formalizing marriages that hadn't been legally recognized under slavery, making sure their children were legitimate heirs. That was critical.
And seeking better clothes, right?
Yeah.
Moving away from the rough slave garments.
Yes, seeking silks and finery, things they'd been denied. And, movement itself was a big one. Testing freedom by leaving the plantation.
Which leads to things like the Exodusters.
Yeah, that mass movement later on, mostly 1878 to 1880, around 25,000 black folks leaving Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, heading for Kansas, trying to escape the violence and find real opportunity.
So asserting individual freedom,
Yeah.
but also building communities, right?
Yeah.
Institutions.
Definitely. The black church became absolutely central. It wasn't just for worship. It was the community hub, the school, the political organizing center.
The numbers are pretty staggering. The Black Baptist Church, I think.
Exploded from maybe 150,000 members to 500,000 by 1870. And education. There was this incredible thirst for learning.
The American Missionary Association sent teachers south.
Right. And you'd see multiple generations, grandparents, parents, kids, all in the same rudimentary classroom, learning the alphabet together. An incredible passion for education.
Okay, so you have freedmen asserting rights, building institutions. What was the federal government doing? What about the Freedmen's Bureau?
Yes, the Bureau.
Yeah.
Set up in March 1865. General Oliver O. Howard was in charge. It was meant to be a kind of, the book calls it a primitive welfare agency.
Primitive, okay. So what did it actually do?
Provided basics, food, medical care. But its biggest success, clearly, was education. Taught an estimated 200,000 black people to read. That's significant.
There's always a but with the Bureau, isn't there? What about the land? The famous 40 acres.
Yeah, that's the big failure. It was authorized to settle former slaves on confiscated land, 40-acre tracts. But it rarely happened.
Why not?
Well, think about it. Real land ownership meant economic independence. That directly threatened the planters who desperately needed cheap labor for cotton. Property rights, especially for the planter class, trumped the needs of the freedmen.
So the Bureau often ended up
What?
siding with the planters.
In many cases, yes. The source says they often collaborated with planters, basically pressuring or persuading black workers into signing these year-long labor contracts, often with their former masters and often very unfair contracts.
Wow. So not quite the leg up it was supposed to be.
Not on the economic front, no. It highlights this deep tension. How far was the government willing to go to actually restructure Southern society versus just, ending slavery on paper?
Okay, so while all this is happening on the ground, the political battle is heating up in Washington, and at the center is Andrew Johnson.
Right, Lincoln's successor. And the book paints him as kind of uniquely unsuited for this moment.
Tell us about him. Orphaned, tailor, rose up, right? Champion of poor whites.
Exactly, but also fiercely states' rights, really dogmatic about it, and a Democrat put on the ticket with Lincoln, a Republican, for wartime unity.
So a political misfit, as the source calls him.
Totally. A Southerner the South didn't trust, a Democrat the Republicans didn't accept, just the wrong guy at the wrong time.
And this sets up the conflict over Reconstruction plans, which actually started even before the war ended.
Yeah, Lincoln floated his 10% plan back in 1863. Simple, fast. Just 10% of the 1860 voters in a state take an oath of allegiance, and boom, the state's back in.
Simple, maybe too simple for Congress.
Way too simple for many in Congress, especially the more radical Republicans. They feared the old planter elite would just waltz back into power.
So they countered with
The Wade-Davis bill in 1864, much stricter, required 50% to take the oath, stronger protections for freedmen.
and Lincoln's response.
He pocket vetoed it, didn't sign it before Congress adjourned, and that really showed the fundamental disagreement. Lincoln saw it as simple restoration. Congress saw the South more like conquered territory needing fundamental change.
Then Johnson takes over. What was his plan?
His proclamation in May 1865 mostly followed Lincoln's lenient approach. But he did add one thing: disenfranchise some leading Confederates, especially those with over $20,000 in property. Though he also handed out pardons pretty freely.
And states had to do what to get back in under Johnson?
They had to hold conventions, repeal the secession ordinances, repudiate Confederate debts, and crucially ratify the 13th Amendment, which formally abolished slavery.
Okay, so Johnson's plan allows Southern states to quickly form new governments, which leads directly to the Black Codes.
Yes. By late 1865, these new state governments, packed with former Confederates, start passing the Black Codes. And this is a huge turning point.
What were these codes designed to do?
Basically, to keep the black population as a controlled, subservient labor force. It was like trying to put slavery back together just under a different name.
How so? What kinds of things were in them?
Well, they varied state by state. Mississippi's were apparently the harshest. They often penalized black people for jumping labor contracts, meaning leaving a job before the year was up.
And the penalty.
Fines. And if you couldn't pay the fine, you could be hired out to pay it off, which is, well, it's peonage, forced labor.
So they recognized freedom technically,
But they barred black people from serving on juries, from renting land in some places, and crucially, from voting. It was about control, economic and social control.
and the reaction in the North.
Outrage. People were asking, is this what we fought the war for? That anger really spiked when former Confederate leaders started showing up in Washington in December 1865.
Like Alexander Stephens, the former VP of the Confederacy.
Exactly. Showing up expecting to take his seat in Congress, Republicans in Congress were just aghast. But their alarm wasn't purely moral, it was deeply political.
Okay. Explain the political threat. This is important.
Right. So before the war, a slave counted as 3/5 of a person for calculating congressional representation. Now, freed, black people counted as a full person 5/5, which meant the southern states, the former Confederate states, would actually get more representation in Congress than they had before the war. About 12 more congressional seats and 12 more electoral votes.
Wow. So the North wins the war, frees the slaves, and inadvertently gives the South more political power.
Precisely. And Republicans realized this Southern bloc, likely all Democrats, could potentially join with Northern Democrats and completely undo everything the Republicans had achieved during the war.
Like what? What were they worried about losing?
Things like the moral tariff protecting Northern industry, the Homestead Act, giving away Western land, maybe even repudiating the national debt or reassuming Confederate debt. It was an existential threat to the Republican agenda.
Okay, so survival mode kicks in for the Republicans in Congress.
Absolutely. In 1866, they pushed back hard against Johnson. They passed the Civil Rights Bill, giving black people citizenship and striking at the black codes. They also vote to extend the life of the Freedmen's Bureau.
Johnson's reaction.
Vetoes both. He's sticking to his states' rights guns.
The Congress?
Congress overrides both vetoes, a major showdown. Johnson gets the nickname Sir Veto, and it shows Congress is digging in.
And they didn't stop there, right? The 14th Amendment.
Exactly. They wanted to lock the principles of the Civil Rights Bill into the Constitution, where Johnson or future presidents couldn't easily undo them. The 14th Amendment is maybe the most important of the three Reconstruction amendments.
Break it down for us. What are its key parts?
Okay, four main things. One, it conferred civil rights and citizenship on freedmen, but, importantly, didn't guarantee the right to vote. Two, it said if a state denied voting rights to eligible males, its representation in Congress would be reduced proportionally.
A carrot and stick approach to suffrage?
Sort of. Three, it disqualified certain former Confederate leaders from holding federal or state office unless Congress removed the disability. Four, it guaranteed the federal debt and explicitly repudiated the Confederate debt.
A powerful amendment. How did the southern states react?
They rejected it. All of them, except Tennessee, just flat out refused to ratify it.
That must have sent a clear message to Congress.
A very clear message. It convinced most Republicans that the South wasn't going to reform itself and that more drastic, federally enforced measures were needed. Johnson's lenient approach wasn't working.
And Johnson didn't help his own cause, did he? That swing around the circle tour.
Oh, that was a disaster for him. In the 1866 midterm elections, he went on this speaking tour, got into shouting matches with hecklers. He came across as undignified, angry, and, frankly, incompetent.
Result.
A massive victory for the Republicans. They won more than a two-thirds majority in both the House and the Senate, veto-proof. The radicals were now firmly in the driver's seat.
Okay, so enter the radical Republicans. Who were the key players?
In the Senate, you had Charles Sumner. He was really driven by the ideal of racial equality. In the House, the most powerful figure was Thaddeus Stevens. He was older, fierier, wanted to punish the planter class and really reshape Southern society.
So, different motivations, but pushing for a tougher Reconstruction.
Right. They clashed sometimes with the moderate Republicans who were more cautious about direct federal intervention, especially economically, but the radicals now had the numbers.
The solution was the Reconstruction Act of 1867.
Passed over Johnson's veto, of course. This was the core of what we call radical or military Reconstruction. It was drastic.
How so? What did it do?
It divided the South, excluding Tennessee, which had ratified the 14th Amendment, into 5 military districts. Each district was commanded by a Union general and policed by federal troops, about 20,000 soldiers in total.
Martial law, essential.
Pretty much. It also temporarily disenfranchised tens of thousands of former Confederates.
And what did states have to do now to get back into the Union?
2 big things. Ratify the 14th Amendment and rewrite their state constitutions to guarantee full suffrage for black adult males. That last part was, as the book says, the bitterest pill for many white Southerners.
But even the radicals didn't get everything they wanted.
No. The moderates managed to keep out provisions for federally funded education or, crucially, land redistribution. So the military was there to enforce political rights, but not really to provide economic support or fundamentally alter the economic structure.
Was this military rule even legal? Wasn't there a Supreme Court case about this?
Good point. Ex parte Milligan in 1866 had ruled that military tribunals were illegal where civil courts were open. But the Reconstruction Act kind of sidestepped that by setting up military government, not just tribunals, and Congress made it clear they wouldn't let the court interfere.
So military rule clears the path for black political participation. How did that work in practice?
Well, the Union League became really important. Originally a pro-union organization in the North, it moved south and became a network of political clubs for freedmen.
What do they do?
Educated members on their rights and duties, campaigned for Republican candidates, represented black grievances, recruited militias to protect communities. They were the grassroots political engine.
And the results. Did black men actually get elected?
Yes. Significantly. Between 1868 and 1876, during these Reconstruction governments, 14 black congressmen and 2 black senators, Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce, both from Mississippi, served in Washington. Many more served in state legislatures and local offices.
That must have infuriated the former Confederates.
Absolutely. They directed a lot of hatred towards white Southerners who cooperated with the Republicans. They called them scalawags. accused them of treason and corruption.
And Northerners who came south.
Those were the carpetbaggers. The stereotype was they were greedy opportunists who just threw their stuff in a carpetbag suitcase and came south to plunder.
But the reality was more complex.
Much more complex. Sure, some were opportunists, but many were former Union soldiers, teachers, businessmen, people who genuinely wanted to help rebuild or modernize the South, bringing skills and capital. The labels were mostly propaganda from resentful whites.
Okay, so we have black men voting, holding office, and then comes the 15th Amendment. What was its specific purpose?
To provide constitutional protection for black male suffrage. Ratified in 1870, it states that the right to vote cannot be denied based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude, basically trying to lock in the voting rights granted by the Reconstruction Act.
But this focus on male suffrage caused problems elsewhere, didn't it? With the women's suffrage movement.
A major split? Yes. Leaders like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony had supported abolition, sometimes putting their own cause on hold. They were furious when the 14th Amendment explicitly inserted the word male into the Constitution when referring to voters.
Why were they so angry?
They felt betrayed. They argued that if the Constitution was being amended, women should be included too. They actually campaigned against the 14th Amendment because of the word male, seeing it as a step backward for women's rights. It created a deep rift.
While these political and constitutional battles raged, what was happening on the ground in the South, particularly regarding violence?
It got ugly. White resistance became organized and violent. The most infamous group, of course, was the Ku Klux Klan, founded in Tennessee in 1866.
The invisible empire of the South. What were their tactics?
Terror, intimidation, violence, using disguises, night riding, targeting black people who asserted their rights, voted Republican, or achieved economic success. Also targeting white Republicans. It was known as the Lash Law.
Did the federal government try to stop them?
Yes, Congress passed the Force Acts in 1870 and 1871. These were tough laws authorizing federal troops to stamp out the Klan's violence. And for a time, they were somewhat effective. Federal enforcement did disrupt the Klan significantly.
But the violence didn't stop entirely.
No, and worse, a crucial Supreme Court decision undermined federal power. In United States v. Cruikshank, 1875, the court ruled that the 14th Amendment only protected citizens from rights violations by the state, not by private individuals or groups like the Klan.
That sounds like a huge blow.
It was devastating. It basically took away the federal government's main tool for protecting black civil rights against terrorism and local violence for decades. It shifted the burden entirely onto state governments, which were often unwilling or unable to act.
Amidst all this, Congress is still battling President Johnson,
Right.
which leads to impeachment.
Right. The radicals wanted him gone. They set a trap with the Tenure of Office Act in 1867. It required the president to get Senate approval before firing any appointee who had originally needed Senate confirmation.
Designed to protect who?
Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, who was secretly working with the radicals. Johnson, believing the act unconstitutional, defied it and fired Stanton anyway in early 1868.
And the House response?
Immediate impeachment for high crimes and misdemeanors, mainly violating the Tenure of Office Act.
Then the trial in the Senate, how did it turn out?
He was acquitted by a single vote. Several Republicans broke ranks and voted not guilty.
Why? Why not remove him?
Several reasons. There was concern about his likely successor, the very radical Benjamin Wade. There were doubts about the charges truly being high crimes, but mostly there was a deep fear of setting a precedent. Removing a president simply for political disagreements could destabilize the whole system of government.
Interesting. So Johnson serves out his term. But his administration did have one, maybe unexpected success.
Yeah, foreign policy. Secretary of State Seward negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867 for $7.2 million.
Seward's Folly, or Seward's Icebox.
Yeah.
People mocked it.
They did. But Russia had been friendly to the Union during the war, and the U.S. didn't want to offend them. Plus, it turned out to be full of resources later on. So maybe not such folly after all.
Okay, back to Reconstruction's end. How did it finally wind down?
Well, by 1870, all the former Confederate states had technically been readmitted to the Union under the congressional requirements, but federal troops remained in some states to prop up the Republican governments.
And when the troops left?
As soon as the troops left, white Democrats, calling themselves Redeemers, used a combination of political maneuvering, economic pressure, and outright violence to regain control of the state governments.
So the process was gradual, But the end came when?
The final end is usually dated to 1877. That's when the last federal troops were withdrawn from the South as part of the deal resolving the disputed presidential election of 1876. The solid Democratic South was now firmly in place. Reconstruction was over.
So let's wrap this up. What's the big takeaway for you, the listener? The legacy here is, well, it's messy.
Extremely messy. On the one hand, you have the monumental achievements of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. They laid the constitutional foundation for civil rights later on. Huge.
But in the short term, for the people living through it.
The benefits for Black Southerners were, as the source says, fleeting, limited, conditional, and the Republican Party was basically wiped out in the South for almost a century.
Why did it fail so badly in the end? What's the consensus?
The book points to a combination. First, fierce, determined, and often violent resistance from white Southerners who refused to accept racial equality. Second, the North's resolve just faded. Weariness, economic distractions, and, frankly, underlying racism in the North itself meant the political will to sustain Reconstruction disappeared.
So the Old South was, in many ways...
More resurrected than reconstructed. That's the key phrase from the text, a powerful summary.
And if we connect this to how history is written, historians have viewed this period very differently over time, haven't they?
Absolutely. Early 20th century historians, like the Dunning School, often saw it as a tragic mistake imposed by vindictive radicals. Later historians like Kenneth Stamp or Eric Foner more recently see it very differently, maybe as a cynical failure to protect rights or even as a noble but ultimately unfinished revolution.
Which leaves a really provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Based on what we've discussed from this chapter, what do you think was the single biggest factor in Reconstruction's failure?
Was it the Southern resistance, the economic failures like not providing land, Johnson's incompetence, the Supreme Court's decisions, or maybe the North just losing interest? There's no single easy answer.
A complex end to a complex story. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the ordeal of Reconstruction. We really hope grappling with this helps you better understand America's ongoing journey.